What are the principles of plant growth? How do plants grow? Quite frankly, gardening is not easy at first, but the knowledge you gain is knowledge for a lifetime. Whether you're small or you're large, you can still learn plenty. There are as many gardening methods as there are gardeners. I'm convinced of that. Down through time, I've had a bunch of different gardens. I've had a Mineralizing grow bed, and it produced wonderfully. I added certain chemicals and stuff grew real well. Organic comes from naturally derived inputs. Biodynamic focuses on humus. Then there's natural, sustainable, and permaculture. All of those are getting more holistic. On the other side of the inputs, the chemical. And I recently asked a farmer friend of mine who has a 2,400-acre dairy farm, how often do you do soil tests? He just laughed and he said, soil tests? I've never done any soil tests. You just throw the anhydrous to it. So I knew real quick what sort of nutrient density he was going to have, because he was only supplying just a fraction of the various minerals and nutrients that plants need. Conventional farming generally only supplies 3 nutrients. And then the Mineralizing 13. So I would suggest to you the ideal is biological agriculture. Going back to the roots, which continuously optimal supply of bioavailable nutrients and optimal growing conditions. So how do we do that? Years ago, I ordered the ideal soil. A lot of the research is based on William Albright from the University of Missouri, studied pastures and forage. And he began to realize that there was a correlation between pasture, plant health, and animal health. And other people have come along and put numbers to some of the ideas that are out there. Real food contains the maximum biological vitality, allowing it to reach its full DNA potential, maximum nutrition, maximum production, and a healthy immune system. And it will provide disease and some insect resistance. Well, what are the optimal environments that we need to optimize to grow? Well, there are several. Obviously, the first one is soil. Grandma Lupke of the Lupke Compost Institute over in Austria said the secret is in the soil, in her heavy brogue, and she walked out into the field, held her hand straight, and shoved it all the way in to her elbow. Yes, she had something there. And then there's light, there's humidity, the nutrients of fertilizer and minerals, and temperature. Let's talk about some of those. Foundational minerals. There are certain minerals that it takes for just a plant to grow. We generally look at the 3, nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, NPK. Those are what most farmers look at. And then we also consider the minor minerals. We look at trace elements because those trace elements are provided in real small amounts, but they are the catalysts that our body uses in the various body functions of producing enzymes, etc. There's humus and soil biology, and there's soil energy, and we're going to talk about each of these in greater detail. Here we go. Optimal soil. Most people think it's comprised entirely of minerals. Not. 50% minerals in the ideal. 23 to 25% air. That's why my friends that farm with horses don't want my tractor on their field. They're afraid it'll compact their field and squeeze the air and the moisture out of their field. 23 to 25% water and 3 to 5% organic matter. 4% are going to be the major minerals, of which there are 3, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are measured in parts per 1,000. 1% are going to be the minor minerals, of which 15 are generally recognized. They are measured in parts per million. And then 1/10 of 1% are the trace elements. We have at least 84 trace elements in the human body, and these in the soil are measured in parts per billion. So we're not talking about very much of it. Well, let's talk about a plant and what it takes to grow. A plant can't be too crowded. There is a spacing that it needs. What is the maximum spacing that you can plant plants? There's a principle involved, and I, through this series, am going to talk about principles. You may not be able to do all of them, but if you do part of them, you'll be well on the way. But you want to plant your plants so that when that plant is mature, its outside leaves will touch the plant next to it. Shade the soil. You'll get some weed protection from that shade. You'll get maximum moisture retention. The beds that you plant on, if you're planting on beds, need to be 2 arms length wide. And it's not the arm of the planter, it's the arm of the picker. Because unless we're careful, we guys tend to reach way out there and we have a wide bed, and then she comes along and starts to pick, and if you're not careful, she's standing over there in the middle of my bed. Sunlight, mostly full sunlight. That's just the way it works. Now, various plants, we need to know plants, and will have various characteristics. In the northern hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere, the row orientation should be basically east to west, because that's how the sun goes. Okay? We've talked about soil, half minerals, quarter water, quarter air, major, minor, and trace minerals, but we haven't talked about humates. Humic acid is the thing, you know, on the forest floor there's humus, and from that comes humic acid. You can buy humates. It's soft brown Lenardite coal, mined in the Menifee district in New Mexico, is the best that you can buy. But what happens is those humates interact with the soil and the minerals of the soil to extract into a water-based solution that mineral that the plant is going to need to grow. And then we're going to talk about energy and paramagnetism, because that energy increases the flow of the plant sap pump. At night, it goes to the roots. In the day, it comes up to the sunlight. And it goes back down and back up and back down and back. And the energy that's in the soil increases the activity of that plant sap pump. Now, admittedly, I'm giving you the whole load, so stand up and understand so that you get the whole benefit, all right? And then you've got organic matter. Well, the organic matter or the biology, the organic matter that's in the soil acts as an insulator for the subtle energies, electrical energies in the soil. The biology says the plant communicates to the biology, the bacteria, fungus around the roots who colonize around the roots, and it says, oh, I need some copper. I need an element of copper. And so the biology reaches out and grabs the copper and sends it to the plant, and that's what makes it go. And if the plant pumps faster, then it gives the nutrients faster. Water, enough to minimize wilting. And you're better off to bottom water. Why? Because if you bottom water, you don't feed the weeds. You don't water the weeds. What do you do when you take a tiller and go through your garden with the tiller? All you do is you stir up the weed seeds that are down there that are inert. You bring them to the top. It rains. What do you have in 2 or 3 days? A whole new crop of weeds. So don't even mess with them. Leave them down there, let them rot, and water from the bottom. The temperature above ground, it needs to be above freezing. Now understand that most plant growth won't start until about 55 degrees. 95 to 100 degrees, the plants are going to really get to going, but you need to be careful to make sure they have water. But below ground, even in the wintertime, if you keep the below ground temperature 75 to 80 degrees, the plants will do just fine, because it's the root zone that really makes a difference. We've talked a little bit about input considerations. I will say this about input considerations. I know people that in their compost pile put wood chips that had herbicides sprayed on them, killed their whole garden for a period of time because of that input. Be very careful what you're putting on your plants. I use worm castings. The worm castings that come from those earthworms are fed non-genetically modified feed. So I'm not even getting GM stuff in my worm poop. It's good stuff. It's rocket fuel to that plant. But you'll notice also down here, fertilizers can turn soils acid, they can oxidate soils, and they can lend to compaction. Hard soil. Okay, here you are, 95% organic, 4% major part per thousand, 1% minor part per million, they're 25, and 1/10 trace elements, 84 in parts per billion. As we have mechanized farming, added ammonium nitrate as fertilizer, and began to use chemicals, the foodborne minerals have really bottomed out. So much so that it takes about 26 apples to get the same nutrients that we used to get in that apple before we started messing with it. We have industrial agriculture and we have biological agriculture. You see my friend Dean with this sweet potato that he grew. She is a little girl, but that sweet potato probably makes about 2 of her heads at least. So it's a pretty good one. What do you do for trace minerals? Now, when I balance soil, I look for the 3 majors and balance the minors, but I also use, because the trace minerals give me my human health, I use 2 different sources every other year, and I have humates, and we'll talk about that. C90, our sea solids, come from an estuary, and what's left after the water's evaporated is what you get. They contain 90 or 92 minerals. The ocean is basically alkaline in nature. There is no disease that is not man-introduced in the ocean. Azomite is also a good trace mineral. Green sand is another one. In our area, I tend to use granite fines because they have 78 of the body's 84, and it costs $30 a ton. C90 has the advantage of having ormus materials. Now, we could get into a long discourse on ormus materials, but I'll leave you to Dr. Google for your education on that to a large degree, but suffice it to say, you want them. I use these trace mineral sources, and the spread rate for C90, if you do not use humates, is 400 pounds to the acre. If you use humates, it's 200 pounds to the acre. I use humates, and I still leave it at 400 pounds to the acre because I want to make sure I have plenty of trace minerals because, again, that's where my body health is coming from. Granite fines, 78 of 84. Beneficial biology, especially mycorrhizal rhizomes. What are they? Those are those white fungus-like threads in the compost pile, and they can increase the root reach 250 times to get moisture and nutrients. Well, there are ways that you can get them. You can buy them. Or you can go out to a banana plantation, to a really good, well-producing banana tree, and you can get some dirt from under that banana tree and seed your own compost pile. Archaea. We're going to talk more about archaea in several sessions, and the session Optimizing DNA. But archaea is an RNA organism that feeds on energy, whether it's hydrocarbons or radioactivity or chemicals. That's what it feeds on. And you can take a commercially farmed farm and clean it up in a year's time instead of 3 years' time that nature would take by using archaea. And then there's tillage. You need to be very careful of tillage because the more tilling you do, the more biology you destroy and the more mycorrhizal rhizomes, fungus that you eliminate from the soil, and that's what gives your plant health. There are a lot of human minerals that we need for various things in the body. Suffice it to say that they're necessary and we want them. There are advantages to mineralizing the soil. You get a higher sugar content, higher minerals, higher protein, greater specific gravity or density. And what does that mean in a plant? That means if you have a frost like we just had at the beginning of this week, this plant has more minerals in the sap, and so that's just like antifreeze in the sap. It will protect that plant from some of the freezing. Now, not all of it, but it will give it a beneficial effect. Sweeter taste, more minerally nutritious food, lower nitrate and water content. What causes food to rot? By and large, it's nitrates from nitrogen and water. So if you don't supply those except from natural sources, that same produce will last far longer than commercially grown produce. lower freezing point, better storage attributes. When you mineralize your soil, you will establish a fertility reservoir of 20 plus years, and you can retest and tweak it every 3 to 5. But you won't have to have a lot of inputs once you do it. It will cost you something, but it will be well worth it down through time. There are 3 classifications of beneficial microorganisms that we'll be talking about. One are the bacteria. And for every cell in our body, there are 10 bacteria in our body. For every 10 bacteria, there are 10 viruses in our body. So we're just basically a shell. The archaea, we want a mix of about 70% archaea, 15% bacteria, and 15% of the right type of fungi. And we're going to be talking more about that. But these microorganisms, because of their quantity, supply a lot of the nutrition. Are they harmful? No. You can take a bath in them if you want. That's what this fella's doing. This is compost tea. That's the way you make beneficial microorganisms, and he's down there taking a bath in it. Elaine Ingham says that if you have disease, if you have plant problems, you just need to keep brewing compost tea until you're out of the woods. She should know. She got her doctorate in compost tea. And I'll share with you where you can download her compost tea manual, the 5th edition. Foliar feeding, the pH of compost tea is 3.5 to 4, so the acid will deal with some of your pests and your diseases, and it will populate your plants with beneficial microorganisms. You can use yucca extract, which will open the pores of the plant leaves and increase the uptake of the foliar feeding. And then there are the mycorrhizal rhizomes. The endos are primarily vegetable crops. The ectomycorrhizal rhizomes are basically for trees. They're different. And every plant has a preferred species. There are thousands of these, but you can buy a mix for what you're wanting to grow. These mycorrhizal rhizomes will increase the root mass 100 to 1,000 times. Bigger roots. And then they will colonize around the roots. The roots will secrete 10 to 30% of the sap, which will feed the bacteria, and the bacteria will select the plant minerals for the plant. Archaea consume energy and reduce the soil to elemental minerals. We'll talk more about that. Here's a tea brewer. Make your own compost tea. You can brew and manage your essential microorganisms. I know of a vineyard that was approached by a friend of mine who's a biological agronomist, and he said, how many fungicide sprays did you have last year? They had 12. And he said, if I would propose that we brew biology and spray it weekly, and let's see how many fungicide sprays we can reduce. He said, keep your fungicides, you may need them. And they had 2 sprays that year instead of 12. So they saved the money from the 10, which 2 sprays of the fungicide covered all the cost of the brewing of the biology for the whole year. And so they saved money, they saved chemicals, and they saved a lot of heartache. If you do you're growing with ormus materials, you may be required to resort to non-approved measuring methods. Nobody told this fella not to stand on the top rung of the step ladder, and I don't see anybody's arm reaching through the corn stalks. But he's getting corn of 300 bushels to an acre. 7 to 9 ears per plant filled out to the tip. The protein content of the corn was increased. He got 250 bushel an acre compared to the 200 bushel an acre, the best in Mexico. So some of these things really work. The energy. There was a U.S. Forest Service agronomist who tested Paradise Valley paramagnetic rock. $1,000 a ton, kind of expensive. The freight is not cheap either because it comes from way out west. But what he found, he was growing country gentleman corn, which is 95 days from seed to maturity. Only his corn, by the 59th day, they were eating their corn. So you remember that plant sap pump that I was talking about? It sped it up. You can get 50% more production just by increasing your energy in the soil. Well, so what do we do with all of this? We need to decide to eat whole foods. You probably don't want to take a tester into the supermarket, but know your grower. Know what you're buying. Be able to look them in the eye and ask them how they're doing. Most of the organic produce comes from China to the U.S. Most of the growing area in China is contaminated with heavy metals. And it may be organic and sold as organic, and it may be contaminated with heavy metals. So you need to know where your stuff is coming from. Vote with your dollars. Buy fresher. Buy naturally grown. Garden. And make a decision to do something about it. What's involved? Premium body fuel just supports your health. And you don't want to find out about the rest of it.